in the blank. You're not getting any younger. So
eat the ice cream. I don't know. That was what I treated to myself yesterday before starting a job. I got a huge ice cream cone.
Hey, you. Yes, you. Welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? Hey, any youngers, it's me, your host, Jen Glantz, back with another episode of the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. I'm so glad you are here for this week's episode because it is quite amazing. Now, a lot of us spend at least a period of our life when we are applying for jobs, when we are looking for new opportunities, when we're not super happy with our purpose, so we try to figure out how to get something different going for us. The application process of applying for jobs is so stressful. Not only is it stressful, but it's so defeating. You send your cover letter, your resume, which is supposed to be everything about who you are, but truly it's not. It's not even like a third of who you are, but that's what you send in. And half the time you don't hear from anybody. And half the time you just sit there and you sulk in the fact that it's not working out for you. That's why I'm really happy and excited to have an amazing guest on the show today. This is a guest that I first met a couple of years ago when she was working for WeWork. And at the start of the pandemic, a lot of things changed for her, and they changed for her pretty fast. Not only was she laid off from her job at WeWork, but she also found out that she was pregnant. So she started off the pandemic figuring out how to get a new job or how to even apply for new jobs, and also preparing to become a new mother. Now, this week's guest tells you some interesting perspective on how she was able to land a new job, and it was more than just sending her cover letter and resume over to different job applications again and again and again. These tips are valuable because sometimes we don't always do the extra step, or we don't always do the right step, and we make the job application process harder on ourselves than it has to be. So I am so excited to introduce you to Brooke Gasaway. I think you are going to love the tips she gives you. Also, find her on LinkedIn because she is so active on there and so inspirational, motivational, and just helpful to the people around her and also to strangers as well. So definitely make sure you connect with Brooke. I will post her link to her LinkedIn down below as well. And I hope you enjoy this week's episode. I am so excited to just jump right in and have you listen to it. All my love, Jen Glantz. And my first question is a fun question that I think you're going to have a lot of fun with. And the question is, how would you explain who you are and what you do from a person you just met at a party?
Whoa. I wish I had prepared for this, but I guess that's your point. You want to throw this at people. I would say that a person who just met me at a party, they might think I'm more quiet or reserved. Maybe at the beginning of the party, they would say that. But then if they stuck with me to the end of the party, they would see that I have like a good sense of humor and that I open up and that I do start to love just being around people, even though I seem to do well with like small groups of people. I don't know if that's really addressing your question.
No, it's awesome. I feel like I'm the same way too. Like I know I seem over the top and all this, but at a party, I'm the one that's like very reserved, very quiet, very much so like, hey, let's start with like the basic questions and then I open up. So I feel you.
Exactly.
You completely. Tell us a little bit more about who you are in general. What should we know about you?
So you should know that one, I'm a recent mom. So I have a son who's 8 months old. You should know that I was a stand-up comic before the pandemic hit and before I got pregnant. You should also know that I am an MS fighter. So every year I raise funds for the Multiple Sclerosis Society for people who are fighting the disease like me, but maybe they're unable to bike ride. I ride bikes for that. And I think I'm a really good friend. People say that I'm helpful and genuine. And I started my career in architecture and I've just transitioned into HR and employee experience. So I'll be excited to tell you about that because that's not a typical route or transition.
I love all of this. I mean, I have so much to say. First of all, you are a really awesome friend. And I see that a lot on LinkedIn. Following Brooke on LinkedIn, a lot of times what you're doing and other people are doing now is encouraging people to post job opportunities that they know about or that aren't a good fit for them. And we'll talk about that coming up. But I also didn't know you were a stand-up comic. Like, explain that.
Yes. So I got into stand-up comedy as a way of actually sharpening my communication skills. So at my previous job at WeWork, I was doing events for large groups, and I had a professional development fund. And one thing led to another, and I said, "Look, comedy is going to make me perform." Quotes around the word perform, but be able to speak better in front of these groups. So I thought I was just joining a stand-up comedy class for professional development. And the teacher said, I quote the teacher, he said, you joined this class for professional development and you're leaving it a comedian. And, all the other people in the class, they've been in comedy for years. They're trying to work on specific parts of their set. I ended up falling in love with it. And so after the class, I learned a lot about communication, but I also learned that I like performing and I like stand-up comedy and that I could be a comedian. So I kept performing for a while after that. And then the pandemic hit and, all the stand-up comedy clubs were closed. They are reopening now, which maybe I will get back into it with a different lens now that I'm a mom.
I love this because it's a story in taking a chance and trying something that you thought was going to be for one thing, and it turns out to be something completely different. And a lot of people are scared to take chances like that, especially with something with stand-up comedy. So what made you push past any fear that you might have felt getting on that stage for the first time?
Let me think about that. I think with comedy in general, or with comedy, what's similar to any like new hobby is that you have to practice a lot and fail a lot. And then the reward is really great because of all the failures. So in order to practice for shows, stand-up comics do open mics. And I did several open mics. I would do like 2 to 3 a week to prepare for shows. So let's say maybe I did 10 open mics to prepare for one show. And when I say one show, my set was only 5 minutes. So you probably did like 20 times the amount of practice for that one 5-minute set. And those open mics were hard, Jen, like really hard. Comics aren't necessarily the nicest group of people. Jokes fall flat. You might come off looking one way that you didn't mean to look. You might accidentally say the wrong word. You might not remember what you were trying to say. But once I had my big show and I actually closed the show for all the comics in my class, I did really, really good. And I got laughs every minute. That's something that comics track is like, what are your laughs per minute? And I got a lot of laughs and it just felt so good that I was making people happy. I've never run a marathon, but I think I would compare it to the sort of adrenaline you might get after you do something really hard. Like after you put the hard work in and then you cross that finish line. That was how I felt, making people laugh, like in a real bar in New York, performing comedy at the New York Comedy Club.
I love this. And I think it's such a great experience in just figuring out not only how to own yourself, show up for yourself, but deal with the twists and turns of being on stage and probably not knowing how people are going to react and handling that, which takes me to where I really want to interview you about today, which is the start of the pandemic. Obviously, that was a time that shocked a lot of people, changed a lot of people's lives. Tell us a little bit about exactly what was going on in your life at the start of the pandemic last year.
Okay. Yeah. So almost 1 calendar year ago, I was 5 months pregnant and I was let go from my job. It was not something that I was expecting. I worked for a company who was already struggling in the public eye. And then COVID hit and there was a massive restructure. And that just meant that the role I was in was eliminated. So it was something I was not prepared for, especially no one knows how to prepare for a pandemic. No one knows how to prepare for a baby, I would say. So it was like all of a sudden those two huge unknowns were like, I was facing them. So that's where I was last year. But what I decided to do was to take some time to, like, for myself. I was like, I might not ever have this time to be alone with just my husband and I before we have our family. So while it was difficult, we were able to spend a lot of quality time together. I was able to really evaluate what I wanted to do next. I spent a lot of time networking with people, and I can go through all the types of interviews I went through. So I did that. I focused on myself. I tried to read a lot. I tried to watch a lot of TV, just like everyone else. And then I had my son in July.
Wow. And congratulations on the birth of your son, especially during not only a challenging year from the pandemic, but for just so many other reasons in your life as well. But talk to us about what it was like, especially, giving birth, having a kid, having a baby, being a mom for the first time, and then having to apply for jobs. What was it like? What were some of the things you did? What worked? Give us that background, because that's got to be tough.
Yeah, it was. So having, it was just my first child. So having my first child in a pandemic, especially in New York City where we live, where there were so many COVID cases and so many people, like I said before, there were just so many unknowns. But I think what I had to do was, for the first time in my life, I wasn't able to plan, years, months, or even days ahead, because no one knew. All I knew is that I wanted to be healthy each day, and whatever the current protocol was at the time I was going to have my son at the hospital, that's what we were going to follow. I couldn't plan it. I couldn't change it, but I knew that I was going to have my son in a hospital, and I was going to listen to the medical officials and do what I had to do. And luckily for me, time July came around, I was able to have one partner, or, one person with me in the hospital room. I know some people weren't even able to do that. So I felt really lucky that my husband was able to be there with me while I had my son. And like I said, we handled it day by day. My son was in the NICU, which is the NICU, for 10 days. Again, something we could not plan. That was something that, his health was most important. So my husband and I, we ended up staying in a hotel near the hospital so we could maximize our time with him. And it was just something we figured out day by day. That was horrible. It was hard, but my son is healthy. Everything was checked. He came back home healthy. And on the bright side of that, I learned from so many nurses in the hospital that day, or all those 10 days. So there, while something can be really hard, there was something that was really great to learning about how to take care of a son, or how to take care of a baby from these people who are taking care of babies every day. There was nothing I could have read in a book that would have prepared me for that, but having a nurse show me what to do was invaluable.
I mean, there's something about what you're saying right now that is so different than how I approach things. And it makes me frustrated about how I am versus how you are, because you almost said, like, I can control what I can control, and I'm going to do that. Whereas I am like a mess in every situation. And I am the kind of person who overthinks, overplans, has options A, B, C, D, E, F. And you were almost like, I'm going to follow the protocols. I'm going to do what I have to do. And you almost just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Is that sort of how you approached the job searching situation after some time when you started applying for jobs again?
Yeah. And I might say that this approach to controlling what I can is something that I really had to learn. And that was something that was very different than what I would have done if it was not a pandemic. So that was something I just had to kind of go with the flow. And before, I would have tried to plan A, B, C, D, E. So I think it's very natural for us to want to do that, especially when we, like someone like me who has anxiety and you want to control it. So with my job search, I think I at first I tried doing the typical route, which for me, the typical route was apply to a job board, search for the roles I thought I was qualified for, apply for them, and then I look at my computer and just wait for an email response. Obviously that didn't work. I had a few interviews, but it was nothing compared to, like, nowhere near the amount of interviews that I wanted to have. I also found myself applying for jobs that I was far overqualified for because it felt really safe. I thought, okay, well, I'm re-entering the workforce. So now I was let go of my job. Maybe I should apply for something that only requires a few years of experience because I know I could do that well. I found myself not challenging myself in the jobs that I was applying for. And after doing this for months and figuring out it didn't work, I ran across something that was really talking about the power of networking and this sort of untapped job market. So yes, there are job postings, but by reaching out to people, talking to people and networking, there are a plethora of choices that you might not even know from the surface. So I said, okay, my strategy is I'm going to find a job that is a great job for me, that pushes me in the right way I'm trying to go in my career. And the way I'm going to do it, my how, is through LinkedIn. That's going to be my channel that I am going to use to network. And I am going to network first with all the people that I know really well, that I've worked with in the past, but I'm also going to start meeting new people, adding new people. And Jen, I have to give you credit for this from a branding workshop. Like, let's say it was like probably 3 years ago now. You said add like 10 people a day on LinkedIn. And to be honest, I thought you were a little crazy. I did not.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one.
Why would I do that? I don't know these people. Why are these people going to accept me? Long story short, the power of networking is really what helps me get the role that I got today. And I can go into details of that story if you want me to.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fascinating because again, a lot of things with those job postings, people think like, I'm just going to send my application in and then they don't hear from people. And they think that that's like the only way to apply for jobs. So I almost want you to maybe share, because a lot of people are listening, want to get a new job, have been applying for a while. What are your top 3 tips for finding a job?
My top 3 tips are to network. No, I will think of more, but let's say I say 3 times network in the first tip, because really start networking now. And networking is for the long game. And really you might think, what the heck is networking? Networking is just meeting new people that are either in the field that you are in or in a field that you're trying to go into. And it's meeting people that will either push you to learn more and to grow, or to meet someone where you can help them learn. So whether that's connecting with someone that you've worked with in the past, just checking in with them, saying, how are you doing? We haven't talked in a few years. I remember you were really focused on this project. So touching base with people that you might have had in the past, but also creating new relationships with people who you might want to work with in the future. And this might not be the job that you get now. It might be the job in 10 years from now. But I want you to try to network and create really genuine connections with people that you think you can give and you can take from, but in a genuine way. And I think the next tip would be you really have to date before you get married. I've heard this saying, but that means don't just jump into meeting a new connection and saying, hey, can you refer me to this job? I see you work at this cool tech startup and I applied for a tech startup. Can you recommend me? If somebody randomly messaged you that, do you trust them? Do you know them? Like, do you have anything in common? No, you probably would not refer that person. So it's hard when you're a job seeker. You think you're doing the right thing at reaching out to people, which you can do. But I think you want to kind of go in slow, ask how they're doing, talk about a mutual connection or interest you have, talk about something you might be able to learn from them. And once they trust you, then you might be able to go into asking for internal reference or asking them for their advice on how they got their role. So that's my second tip of advice, is really try to create genuine connections with people. And 3 is you need to set your foundation before you jump to the end. So what I'm talking about is, having a resume, a LinkedIn bio, and your elevator pitch really in sync. So you really know like what's your value and what you can bring to companies. I think you really want to know that first before you start applying, because you can get into this vicious cycle of looking through job boards and you start thinking, I could stretch this way, I could do that, I could do this, but is that what you want to do? What are you good at? What values can you bring to a company? So really you want to know that for yourself first. That way, whenever you do connect with someone and they essentially ask for your elevator pitch, you have it ready. It's there, it's quick, you know your value, and you know where you're trying to go. And that'll kind of keep you focused from these, peripheral jobs that are floating around that you think, oh, it could be okay. Focus on what you're really good at and what you think you really want.
Taking so many notes because a lot of your advice I don't think is so obvious. I think it's not things people always think about. I actually want you to come back on if you're okay with it to talk about networking in detail.
Sure.
I love the tip of like networking, but also date before you get married and like all of these things. It's almost like a step-by-step strategy. And I think that is brilliant. So I appreciate those tips. And I do actually I think when this episode goes live, a lot of people are going to have a lot of questions and want you to expand on more. So I am back if you're willing to come back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I could give an example if we have the time. The way I got the current role that I will be starting was not through applying through a job board. It started with making a new connection on LinkedIn. So I connected with a mother who we had similar interest in event planning. There was some crossover there. And then 2, she shared a post that was for an organization called the Mom Project that said, if you're a mother and you're willing to share a story about being laid off during the pandemic, respond. So I responded to that post. And then 3, next thing I know, I was on a CNN interview talking about my hardships. And I almost didn't do that interview because I was scared. Like, is this good karma to talk about it? But I did it because I thought there has to be some sort of networking or something has to come out of this. Either I'm going to make a new friend. Somehow there's going to be something that comes out of this. And hopefully it's a job. I don't know what the job is, but I'm going to be open to it. And so after that, I had so many people reach out to me, and that's how I ultimately landed this role that I'm getting into, was all through putting myself out there and putting this little story. I don't like to say my story because I think my life story is a lot. I put out this micro story, which was a little piece of a few months about me. I put that out into the world. Other people related to it. And then they saw my value, and I had my LinkedIn all set up. It was prepared. I had my resume set up. I had my elevator pitch ready. So when that opportunity came, I was just ready to talk. I was ready to say, this is what I'm looking for.
I love that. I mean, it's almost like, I think people get so bogged down by applying for jobs, not hearing back, but you were doing maintenance in between applying for jobs, right? Like updating your LinkedIn, getting everything ready to go. And that's actively working too. So I think your case, it doesn't seem so far-fetched that all of this happened. I so believe in the power of networking, of connecting with people. You never know what's going to happen. So first of all, thank you for sharing your story with us. Second of all, we're having a part 2 coming soon, everyone.
Awesome.
Before I let you go, I want to end this interview like I end them all. So I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank. You're not getting any younger. So eat the ice cream. I don't know. That was what I treated to myself yesterday before starting a job. I got a huge ice cream cone. Love that. You know what? You should treat yourself, especially with something you love. So I love that. And before you go, Brooke, share with us where people can connect with you if they want to ask some questions or just be your friend.
Absolutely. So I think the best platform is LinkedIn. Like I said, my name is just Brooke Gasaway. I'm sure you'll see it on the podcast details. I'm always open to new connections. I'm constantly responding to people in my inbox. If I don't get back to you, reach back out in a month or so. I'm always happy to talk. And I hope to talk to you there.
I love that. And thank you for saying, if I don't get back to you, you'll reach out again, because that happens. People are busy. They're not trying to ignore you. So remember that. I love that you even just mentioned that as well. And Brooke, thank you so much for being on the show today. Hey, you. Thank you for listening to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. There are hundreds of thousands of pods out there, so thank you for listening to this one. You can find the show notes for this week's episode up on our website, anyyounger.com. Subscribe, rate, and review the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast on iTunes so that other ears around the world can listen too. Oh, and join our secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group, where over 1,000 people are talking about how to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. Until next week, all my love, Jen Glantz.